Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining this dialogue, Daniel.
Mhm.
Um, let's first of all offer you some space, create some space for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm Daniel. I'm a researcher at Tampere University, a doctoral researcher, and my topic is using games and gamification for climate change engagement and more broadly sustainability, mostly environmental sustainability, but all of these topics related to this important topic right now.
Thank you. Let's dive into the topic. So, first question: How can we use gamification with care for the planet to transform education, especially learning relations?
One thing that I think is, so from my point of view, and this is probably highly, opinionative and personal, but I think that education, first of all, has a general sort of a general idea or goal of creating or fostering critical thinking in a way. And when we are critically assessing our reality and our social reality, physical reality, all of the social structures that we are embedded in, when we are using gamification that tells us that caring for the planet is positive for certain reasons, it is impossible that then the relationships will not be transformed, and the education of relationships and between learners and with teachers and with mentors, etc., have to be transformed if that education is properly reflected upon and shared with others. So I think autonomy is very important in this sense. If we are talking about empathy, for example, and understanding what the other wants and the other things and the other might need, it is then very difficult for us to establish a vertical system or something that is very in one way. But I do think also as well that for me, guidance will always be important and necessary. I don't think people necessarily learn by themselves, just leaving them alone with resources without any kind of help. But I do think that it's more of a guidance than a strict teaching or something like this.
Thank you. What are 2, 3 events or people that influenced your research and study as for gamification for care for the planet?
So I think that it's been a very incremental process. There haven't been shock moments, mostly where I realized something completely different. But what I do think is that for me it was very positive to see the practitioner side. So being working in studios and companies and seeing what actually life is in a company where you have clients and you have different, interests. And then, of course, going to university and thinking more of the theoretical parts of it. But one interesting thing for me that is related to the first question is that many times I feel that I have learned a lot or even more from brilliant classmates that I had than I did from teachers, for example. Having conversation with peers and then maybe engaging in projects outside of the class and this sort of thing. These things have been sometimes more valuable than the class itself. So I think it is a bit of a process of trying to question all the time whatever you know. And it is true that sometimes when I go for a few days without finding anything that seems to question what I think, I fall into this selfish idea of, well, maybe I already know everything that there is, and then there's always something new that you find and you're like, well, maybe I was wrong, at least partially wrong on things. And I think it's a beautiful process that never stops, and that is the nice thing of it. But I cannot recall single aha moments or something like this. So yeah, very incremental, I would say.
Okay, thank you. You were mentioning this relation with the colleagues when learning with the peers. So let's get to the third question. What is needed in the classroom environment in order for gamification with care for the planet to actually transform the learning, facilitate the engagement? Maybe 2, 3 elements you would like to focus on?
Yeah, I think so. This, of course, will come from the literature that I have read more than my own research right now. But one very, very important thing that I have seen is, as with many other things in life, is having a clear idea of what the learning goal is, or what is actually the thing that we want to do, and this will inform a lot in terms of gamification or games. What kind of system are we putting in place? So there are certain things that, if we're talking about theoretical knowledge, for example, it's completely fine that we make a digital game where people just play on their own and reflect upon it and everything. But other things, when we are trying to tell people, hey, have you considered that what principles are relevant for negotiations, for example, then it might make sense that we have a role-playing game where all the students work together and maybe there are different groups and this sort of thing. So that is one very interesting thing. I don't think there is a single format or a single approach that can do everything, at least not with the skills and knowledge that I have seen around. Maybe in the future people come up with new stuff. And then apart from that, I think that there are principles that work generally well when we're talking about using games for education. One of them that is often repeated is debriefing. So the idea that, okay, we are playing, we are immersed in the game, we are doing all of these things in the playful frame, but then when we are done with this, we discuss about it, and everyone voices their opinion about what they saw and reflect upon this. And the other thing is one aspect that is, of course, integrating the games properly in the curriculum. It's a bit strange unless it's a very memorable thing. If we just, we have class and one day we do a session of something and then that has nothing else to do with whatever we are doing in education. I think the proper way is probably trying to integrate the curriculum with the playful activity and be, okay, now we are talking about this topic, so we're going to play a game, but then we're going to try to connect it all the time. And maybe many days and weeks after having played the game, if we are still talking about the same topic, being like, remember how in the game we did this and did that. So I think that sort of integration is very valuable. And another thing, of course, is if possible, I think games that extend in time, so they are not a one thing that is played during half an hour or an hour and then it's done, but something that repeats session over session and builds. I think that is great, not only because it works very well with memory, but because it's something that starts to get ingrained in the ways that we do things. And finally, of course, being very pragmatic is resources. If teachers or the people who do these things do not have the time, the resources, the support to do all of this, they will just not be able to do it properly. Maybe they will do something that looks like a game and feels in a way, but it's not exactly well thought out. And I think that is not the fault of the person, is that they didn't have the resources to properly do it.
Okay, you might have already answered this question, but let's see, maybe underlining some ideas. How can we learn meaningfully with gamification for climate change and care for the planet, accessing also wisdom, so making space for that, and indigenous knowledge or indigenous science, if we can say so. So going back to some social cultural construction.
Mm-hmm. I think one very interesting thing is that sometimes so developers of games and gamification and designers have the technical skill to do very engaging games and good looking games and all this idea that they are crafting something that is engaging, but there is not necessarily the knowledge. And one very key thing that you said is none of us, as far as I know, is living in indigenous societies and really has a visceral understanding of how this goes. We can read books, we can watch interviews, we can do many things, but unless we have a proper conversation or even involve people in the design teams and do this sort of co-creation and collaboration, it's not possible. So one of those things would be that opening the design space for people who know what they are doing and what they are talking about, which is something that we don't do sometimes because we don't think of it, because we don't have the time, because we perceive that it's going to be too complicated. But it's in many ways it is the proper way of doing that if we want to do something significant. Then another thing, of course, is going back to the resources. Without providing resources for designers and developers to do these things, they will of course happen, and there's brilliant people who can do a lot with very, very few opportunity and resource, but it is probably tiring, and it's not going to happen many times. And finally, I think one very important thing is that gamification and games could do more is helping people making more explicit or think about how they want the world to be. So having these visions of, okay, we have a playful frame in which you have all of these pieces and all of these impulse to create something, and we put that in service of, when you come out of the game, what is that you created, what are the visions that you had in the game that could then go forward and become what you want the world to be, and then start building the steps towards that. And we know that it's not up to the individual to build that future, and it's it is very complicated, but to have a role in that and to have a say, we need to have some sort of idea of what we want the future to be. And of course that vision will be refined, it will change. It's the process of learning that we were talking about, but at least we will have some sort of basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got to the envisioning part. So what kind of world, community, and education you would like to see out there in the next 3 to 5 years using such tools that we already have?
Mm-hmm. I think what I would like to see is, of course, being very focused on this topic and being very interested in that, is seeing that games and gamification are integrated in ways much more, they are normalized in a way, so that it is done with intention. And of course you go to classrooms, especially in early education, and there is a lot of games going on, and teachers are coming up with playful activities constantly. But to make it normal for any age and any circumstance that you could be playing a game that has this, that talks about this topic. It's not necessarily that the game wants you to change your mind or is trying to lecture you on something, but a game that is reflecting different ways of doing things. And this is not only for environmental sustainability. I think, for example, there are many games that appeal to people who do not like action or violence or just shooting all the time, and they are more about taking care of others or having conversations. So these things, I would like to see more of that, definitely, in the next years. And then the other things, of course, is that policymakers and the people who actually can create the conditions for this to happen pay more attention to this and can provide the resources, the laws, the space, etc. So then finally, I think the most important thing is that what I want to see in 5 years is that we have changed the course that we are going towards as a species, and that we have done much more to try to avert catastrophic environmental crisis, and then that games played some sort of part, not more than they can, not less than they can, just what they can, because of course not everything is going to be resolved with games, but I think many things can be addressed if we use games more.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Daniel, for sharing your ideas, your knowledge, and the clarity of this format. I think the teachers will have some resources and get inspired and support for their work. Thank you.
Thank you a lot.